I was looking at old photographs of the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, just casual browsing really, when I noticed something that stopped me cold. A night photograph. The entire city was glowing. Hundreds of buildings, miles of promenades, thousands upon thousands of incandescent bulbs tracing architectural lines with surgical precision, fountains lit from within, lagoons reflecting cascades of electric brilliance. And this was 1893. This was Chicago, a city that had burned to the ground just 22 years earlier. Electric light, we're told, the triumph of modern illumination, the dawn of a new age. And maybe that's true. Maybe. But the deeper I looked, the more that simple explanation began to collapse under the weight of what these photographs actually show. Because this wasn't just Chicago. It wasn't just one fair, one city, one moment of technological showcase. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision across decades, across continents, across supposedly disconnected events. And as quick as they came, they vanished within months, destroyed and erased. These cities glowed. Entire fabricated metropolises, built in months, demolished in months, but in between, for those brief windows, they blazed with light that seems impossible for the era that produced them. This raises a simple but critical question. How? Let me be specific about what these photographs depict. The 1893 Chicago World's Fair covered 690 acres. The main buildings alone contained over 200 miles of incandescent light fixtures. We're told that 120,000 lamps illuminated the grounds. That's not a few buildings with electric lights as novelties. That's comprehensive, uniform citywide illumination in 1893. The 1901 Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, 350,000 lights. The 1904 Louisiana Purchase Exposition in St. Louis, over 100,000 arc lamps and incandescent bulbs, creating what was called the greatest display of artificial light ever attempted. The 1915 Panama Pacific Exposition in San Francisco employed 500,000 colored lights, creating what witnesses described as a jeweled city, visible from ships 60 miles at sea. And here's the strangest part. These weren't permanent installations. These were temporary exhibitions, built in 18 months, 20 months, 2 years, then demolished, razed, returned to empty land or parkland or rubble. But while they stood, they glowed like nothing else on Earth. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The official history tells us that electric lighting was new, expensive, experimental. Edison's Pearl Street Station, the first commercial power plant, opened in 1882 in New York, serving just 85 customers within a 1 square mile area. 11 years later, the Chicago World's Fair illuminated 690 acres with 120,000 lamps. Does that timeline make sense to you? Because it gets more complicated. These weren't just lights strung up on existing infrastructure. The photographs show uniform, comprehensive illumination. Every building, every walkway, every fountain, every sculpture bathed in light. The infrastructure required is staggering. Power generation, distribution networks, thousands of miles of wiring, transformers, junction boxes, maintenance systems, all for a temporary fair, all built in under 2 years, all dismantled and destroyed immediately afterward. The deeper I went into the technical specifications, the more the official explanation began to fracture. Consider what we're actually being asked to accept, that in an era when most American cities had limited or no electric lighting, when power distribution was in its infancy, when the technology was prohibitively expensive during this precise moment, organizers somehow mustered the resources, expertise, and coordination to create the most sophisticated lighting systems the world had ever seen. Not in permanent installations for major cities, in temporary exhibitions. This raises another question. Where did the expertise come from? The official answer is that electrical contractors were hired, that systems were installed, that everything proceeded according to standard engineering practices. But what standard practices? These were the first installations of their kind. There was no playbook, no previous template. These exhibitions were supposedly pioneering demonstrations of technology that was still being invented, and yet they worked flawlessly, uniformly, across multiple continents, multiple cities, multiple fairs, all within the span of a single generation. And that's where the phenomenon becomes impossible to ignore, because it wasn't just America. The 1889 Paris Exposition Universelle featured the newly constructed Eiffel Tower illuminated by thousands of gas lamps and electric lights, creating what contemporaries called an artificial sun. The 1900 Paris Exposition expanded the concept, with the Palace of Electricity generating 21,000 horsepower to light the entire exhibition grounds. The 1908 Franco-British Exhibition in London, 120,000 lights transforming Shepherd's Bush into what newspapers called a fairyland of illumination. The 1910 Brussels International Exposition, comprehensive electric lighting throughout, with the Grand Palais alone containing 40,000 light bulbs. Sydney, Melbourne, Barcelona, Turin, Buffalo, St. Louis, Omaha, Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, San Diego, every major fair, every exhibition, every World's Exposition from roughly 1889 to 1915. The same pattern: temporary cities, massive scale, comprehensive illumination, and then demolition. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. If you're just joining this investigation, I encourage you to look at these photographs yourself. They're not hidden. They're in archives, libraries, historical collections, night photographs of the world's fairs. Study the uniformity of the light. Consider the scale. Ask yourself, does the official explanation satisfy you? Here's where we encounter what I call the coordination problem. Let's accept, for a moment, the official narrative that these fairs represented the cutting edge of electric lighting technology, that they were showcases for the modern age, that the technology, while new, was indeed capable of producing these results. Fine. But that raises an even more troubling question. How did organisers across different continents, different cultures, different nations all arrive at nearly identical architectural and technological solutions within the same narrow time frame? The White City in Chicago, 1893. Neoclassical architecture, uniform white buildings, comprehensive electric illumination, grand courts and lagoons, all designed by Daniel Burnham's team. The Ivory City in Buffalo, 1901. Nearly identical aesthetic, white buildings, electric spectacle, the same grand scale. The Court of Honor in St. Louis, 1904, the pattern repeats. The Jewel City in San Francisco, 1915, again the same basic template. And it wasn't just architectural style, it was the complete system, the layout, the materials, the lighting, the temporary nature, the speed of construction, and most importantly, the comprehensive documentation of the buildings themselves, but the curious absence of detailed records about their construction processes. We have thousands of photographs of these completed cities. We have architectural drawings, we have visitor accounts, newspaper reports, official guides. But try to find detailed engineering records of how they built these power systems. Try to locate the training programs that produce thousands of electricians simultaneously across multiple continents. Try to trace the supply chains for the millions of light bulbs, miles of copper wire, generators, transformers. The evidence suggests something much larger than simple technological progress, and then they disappeared. Not gradually, not piece by piece, not repurposed or integrated into existing cities. They were demolished, systematically, completely. The White City in Chicago, which took 20,000 workers and cost over $28 million to construct, was largely demolished between 1893 and 1894. Some buildings burned in a fire, others were torn down. A few structures remain, but the vast majority gone. The same pattern in Buffalo, in St. Louis, in San Francisco. These weren't primitive wooden structures. The photographs show massive palaces, grand courts, elaborate facades, Many were built with staff, a mixture of plaster, fibre and cement over steel or iron frames. Some buildings were indeed more permanent, but the majority temporary despite their monumental appearance. And here's where the narrative fractures completely. If you possess the capability to build these magnificent structures, if you had mastered large-scale electric lighting decades before it became common, if you had coordinated this effort globally, why make it all temporary? Why not build cities that would last? The official answer involves costs, land use, the nature of exhibitions as temporary showcases. And maybe that's sufficient for you. Maybe the economic explanation satisfies, but it didn't satisfy me. Because what haunts me most isn't what we're told about these glowing cities, it's what we're not told. Try to find mainstream historical analysis that seriously grapples with the technological anomaly. Try to find academic papers that question how this level of electrical infrastructure appeared so suddenly, so comprehensively, and then, in terms of public adoption, proceeded so slowly afterward. The 1893 Chicago Fair had comprehensive electric lighting. 20 years later, most American homes still use gas or kerosene. The technology existed, the expertise existed, the supply chains existed, but residential electrification proceeded at a crawl for decades. Why the gap? If these fairs proved that large-scale electrical systems were feasible, affordable enough for temporary exhibitions, why did permanent implementation take so much longer? The silence was deafening. Not conspiracy silence, not suppression, just absence. An absence of curiosity about the discontinuity, an absence of serious questioning, an acceptance of the official narrative despite the troubling gaps it contains. Let me show you what else appears in these night photographs. The quality of the illumination itself. Modern electric lighting creates harsh shadows, uneven distribution, hot spots and dark areas. Gas lighting produces softer, yellower light, but look at the fair photographs carefully. The light appears remarkably uniform, soft, diffused. It seems to emanate not just from visible fixtures but from the buildings themselves. Some structures appear to glow, as if the walls were translucent or the material itself luminescent. Now, there are explanations for this. Photographic exposure times could create this effect. The white staff material was specifically chosen to reflect light effectively. Strategic placement of lights, reflectors, careful architectural planning, all could contribute. Could. But when you see the same quality of illumination in Chicago, Paris, San Francisco, Brussels and Sydney, all using supposedly different systems, different architects, different technologies, the coincidence becomes harder to dismiss. The deeper I looked, the more I realized I wasn't looking at primitive electric lighting systems struggling to illuminate temporary exhibitions. I was looking at something that appeared fully formed, sophisticated, comprehensive, not experimental, not developmental, not primitive, mature. This is what keeps me awake at night. Not whether these cities existed, we have photographic proof. Not whether they were illuminated, the evidence is overwhelming. But this. Where did the knowledge come from? Technology doesn't appear fully formed. It develops through stages, through trial and error, through gradual refinement. The history of electric lighting should show a clear progression from primitive installations to sophisticated systems. And in some ways, it does. Edison's early work, Tesla's contributions, the development of AC systems, we have that progression documented. But then these fairs appear, and the progression jumps. The scale explodes, the sophistication leaps forward, and then, and this is crucial, it leaps backward again. The public infrastructure that follows is less comprehensive, less sophisticated than what was demonstrated at these temporary exhibitions. It's as if someone briefly opened a door to advanced capability, demonstrated it globally in these glowing cities, and then closed the door again, returning to slower, more gradual development. Why? I don't have an answer. I have questions. Many questions. Consider what happened after these fairs closed. The buildings demolished, burned, repurposed, or left to decay. The detailed technical documentation sparse or missing. The thousands of workers who built these systems dispersed, unnamed, uninterviewed in any comprehensive way. We have visitor accounts, thousands of them, people describing the beauty, the spectacle, the wonder of these glowing cities. But try to find detailed accounts from the engineers who designed the electrical systems. Try to locate comprehensive records of the power plants, the distribution networks, the maintenance procedures. Fragments exist, enough to construct an official narrative, but not enough to truly understand how it was done. And this pattern, this specific pattern of preservation and omission, repeats across every major fair. We remember the spectacle. We forget the mechanism, we preserve the photographs, we lose the blueprints, we commemorate the achievement, we erase the process. Once you see this pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. And here's what pulled me deeper into this investigation. These weren't the only glowing cities. Historical records mention other places, other times, where comprehensive illumination appeared in contexts that seem equally anomalous. Ancient accounts of temples that glowed without fire, medieval descriptions of cities that blazed with cold light, Renaissance reports of illuminated structures that defied contemporary technology. Most historians dismiss these as myths, exaggerations, misunderstood natural phenomena. Maybe they're right. But after studying these World's Fair photographs, after grappling with the technological discontinuities, after seeing the pattern of comprehensive illumination, followed by systematic erasure, I'm less certain. What if the fairs weren't introducing new technology but reintroducing old technology? What if the knowledge existed before, was lost, was briefly recovered, and then lost again? I'm not claiming this is true. I'm asking, does the evidence allow for this possibility? So we return to where we began. The glowing cities. How was this possible? Not the simple mechanical answer. Electricity, generators, wiring. I understand those components. What I don't understand is the system that produced them so suddenly, so comprehensively, so globally, and then dismantled them so completely. I don't understand how temporary exhibitions in the 1890s achieved lighting sophistication that wouldn't become commonplace in permanent cities for another 30 to 40 years. I don't understand the coordination across continents, the uniformity of approach, the similar architectural languages, the repeated patterns of construction and destruction. I don't understand the silence, the lack of serious historical inquiry into these discontinuities, the acceptance of an official narrative that leaves so many questions unanswered. And most of all, I don't understand this. If we possessed this capability once, the ability to create comprehensive urban illumination, to build monumental structures quickly and efficiently, to coordinate globally on massive projects, why don't we possess it now? Or do we, and we simply choose not to use it this way? The night photographs remain. They're not hidden, not suppressed. They're in archives, available for anyone who wants to look. Images of cities that blazed like jewels, glowed like dreams, illuminated the darkness with an intensity that contemporaries found miraculous. And then vanished, leaving only the photographs. And questions about what we knew and forgot, questions about what we built and destroyed, questions about the knowledge that briefly surfaced in these glowing cities and then receded back into shadow. I don't know what these fairs really were. I don't know if they represent lost technology, hidden history, or simply a moment when ambition outpaced economics and these impossible things became briefly, beautifully real. But I know this. The official explanation that these were simply early demonstrations of electric lighting is incomplete. It doesn't account for the scale, the coordination, the sophistication, or the erasure. Something else was happening in these glowing cities, something we've chosen to forget, or something we've been encouraged not to remember. The photographs preserve the light, but the knowledge that produced it, that remains in darkness. And perhaps that's where it was always meant to stay.